So, good morning everybody. Hope you had a good party last night.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful place here, I should say. First, when I saw where it is located, I thought, oh my god, where I have to go. And then the bigger problem later this day is actually to get from here to the airport, but I think I will somehow manage that. So we have exactly 1.5 hours together, and then indeed I have to leave to the airport to catch my plane. And we will use these 1.5 hours actually for the relations, and mainly the trade relations, economic relations between the EU, the European Union, and the Eurasian Economic Union. This place, by the way, very much reminds me to a place when I was as young as you that I visited not too far from Luxembourg. And when I was a student, I actually organized a very nice trip for students from Germany and from Scandinavia to meet other students in Luxembourg. They came from Luxembourg and from France. And we had a very nice seminar in a nice chateau outside of Luxembourg. And then we really had a very productive session at daytime. And we were the only, it was a very nice chateau, but officially it was in a youth hostel. And we had a very nice seminar, worked very hard, and then in the evening we thought we should have a good party. And the lady who was the manager of this chateau, she told us, well, we are the only group in that hostel, in that chateau, and she could give us the wine cellar, and we could have a nice party there in the evening. So we thought there is wine, certainly, and maybe some other drinks. So we went there in the evening, and unfortunately, no wine. Nothing at all. There was a fridge, even 2 or 3 of them, but nothing inside. And it was very remotely located, so we thought, well, what to do now? So we were looking around, neighboring rooms, and we thought, well, probably somewhere there is all the wine. But how to get in? Now I tell you a story you better don't tell anybody else, and you right away forget it after I tell it to you. So one of us thought, well, you remember in the kitchen, I think I saw a small box with all the keys. So let's check whether the kitchen is open. Okay, so we checked, the kitchen was open. So we somehow got access to this key box. I don't tell you how, but we got access to the keys and we tried. So the first other room was not the wine storage. So then the second one, the third one, eventually we made it and we found I think lots of bottles of wine. So we had a very nice party that evening, and it was all white wine. And then after, probably we had a little bit too much wine, someone had the idea, well, we put back all the bottles and put their water in. So next morning, we felt really bad, not only physically but also mentally, what we did. But we somehow we didn't tell what we did. So we left. After 2 weeks, I received a letter from that chateau management. I was wondering, shall I open it or better not? Well, I decided to open it. It was a very nice letter. Thank you very much that you visited us, and we are always we are looking forward to always seeing you again. Well, I think in this life I still should go there once to this chateau and should apologize probably. Now this is 25 years ago, so from a legal point of view they probably can't catch me any longer. I think it's time I should probably go there, and I definitely will go there during this life. So, but this was not for copy-paste, this story. So this was just for warm-up session a little bit. So I hope there are no such stories with you yesterday evening here at this nice place. Good. This no came not very convincing, but okay, let's leave it like that. Why I started a little bit with this story, because indeed 25 years ago, when I was a student, I organized quite a lot of such events like you do this at the moment, and still today I can say I feel a little proud that 25 years ago we had large banners where we said we are fighting for the single European market, we are fighting against the borders in Europe, we are fighting for a single currency. So all this was really later realized. We started to fight for and to go on the street in our early years, when other young people organized demonstrations against atomic energy and some other things. So we fighted for something, and we achieved it indeed. And I think yesterday there was a very interesting presentation. Unfortunately, I was not present during all the presentations because I had some other commitments in Paris as well. But I don't remember who it was, but there was one presentation where the guy said, so now it is time to bring the West Roman and the East Roman Empire somehow together, or the history of this. Yeah? And so I think this is exactly what we will be talking about this morning. So how to bring the European Union and the Eurasian Economic Union, how to bring them closer together, and not only these two unions, but certainly also all the other countries in between, what is the project Single Economic Space from Vladivostok to Lisbon. So this will be a little bit what I will be talking about this morning, and would be very glad certainly if we make this a kind of interactive session, so that it's not only me who talks all the time, but so just interrupt me, raise your hand, and then ask questions, or also give a counter speech if you like. Yeah? So just as a short reminder, so European Union, with about 500 million people on 4.4 million square kilometers. And when you compare that with the Eurasian Economic Union, so less than half the people, 180 million, most of them live in Russia, 20 million square kilometers, so really huge. Yeah? Now in the meantime, 5 countries. When you ask someone in Germany on the street, do you know what is the Eurasian Economic Union? I believe that maybe less than 1% of the people in Germany on the street probably can say anything on the Eurasian Economic Union or ever heard about it. If you ask people on the street in Germany, do you know the customs union, which was the union before of Belarus, Russia and Kazakhstan, then probably I would say about 2-3% of Germans on the street may know what this is. They probably associate this a little bit with a negative touch. That is because the German media reported very often like Putin's customs union, and when you mention the word Putin, that gives in Germany in media, how they put it usually gives a kind of negative touch, what is not very pleasant, I should say. But interestingly, most of the Germans, when you ask about CIS countries, that, for example, Germans, still probably more than half of the Germans remember CIS countries, and probably believe that this is still more or less in place today. Formally it is, but in reality, I think not really. And what I find very interesting, when you now compare a little bit how the European Union and how the Eurasian Economic Union, how they developed. Is that somehow visible? Yeah. And so yesterday I think we also talked a lot already about the development of the European Union. So it all started after World War II, so with the Treaty of Paris on coal and steel community, so even earlier than the Treaty of Rome, which is very often considered as the start of the European community. And the Treaty of Rome then was more comprehensive, not only the coal and steel community, but it was then in 1957 a comprehensive treaty on economic cooperation, that time among 6 founding countries. And what I think is very, very important to still consider today is it is an economic union, and it was created as an economic community, but it had a very clear political intention. Yeah? So the idea that time was, if you bring coal and steel together, so these are the major means that you need for a war, and if you bring all that together among the countries, then a war hopefully will not be possible. And right, I mean, in the European Union, indeed, this idea that time to found the European community, I think, is probably one of the best ideas that ever existed in Europe. 1968 is the customs union of the European communities. So more or less from a formal point of view, you can say the European Union in 1968 was on that level where of the customs union of the three countries. Yeah? And it took quite a long time. Yeah? So it took from the Treaty of Paris to the customs union, it took 17 years. Yeah? This we should also keep in mind when we look at the development of the Eurasian Economic Union, which in the West I see is very often still criticized. I will come to that back later. But we should not forget how quickly all this now developed over the last couple of years. Yeah. Then a very important year in the history of European unification is the year 1986. With the Single European Act. What is the Single European Act? I briefly mentioned that yesterday afternoon. Start of the common market. And here was an extremely important principle that time was implemented of mutual recognition. Yeah? That's what I think very briefly mentioned yesterday. The member states of the European community could not agree on total harmonization of technical standards, norms, and so on. So therefore what they did is they are close enough together that we can accept certain differences, but nevertheless we say if a product is licensed and is good for the market in France and the French authorities give all their approval, then this means you can bring this product also on the market in all the other countries of the European community. And that was really a big success factor because first of all that meant you have a product certificate in one country and right away can bring it to market all over the European community. And secondly, what maybe even gave a harder push to the entire development is that it created competition. Yeah? So certain companies certainly were then also wondering, well, where should we first bring this product to market? Because bureaucracy is less and it's easier to deal with the authorities. Another, I think, extremely important year for the European unification is the Treaty of Maastricht in 1992. That time I was a student and I still remember this time when professors tried to understand this Treaty of Maastricht. Does any of you have ever seen this Treaty of Maastricht? And do you remember anything what is written there or how it is structured? No, because it is almost impossible to understand it. Because it is not a treaty like preamble and then first article, second article and gives a story. But it is just a treaty that changes everything. So it just says, paragraph 1. Paragraph 1, please, we want to change in the regulations, article to now the following wording, and so on. Yeah? So I remember this time where the professors at university, but also politicians, nobody could really explain this Treaty of Maastricht. And that time as a student, what I did is I collected lots of summaries that either professors or journalists and so on wrote on the Treaty of Maastricht, and I prepared a presentation of 10 slides. And then I organized an event at my university. That was Kiel University in the very north of Germany. Studied economics there. And I invited the minister of that state in Germany, in the very north, Schleswig-Holstein, who was responsible for European affairs, and two professors. And I still remember when the three of them were on the stage, and then I announced that I now will first give a short summary of the Treaty of Maastricht. And then the minister told me, "Oh, Mr. Schneider, then probably I can now go for 3 cigarettes or even more, because that will take at least half an hour to summarize the treaty." I said, "No, Mr. Minister, please stay here. It will be 5 minutes." So he said, "Well, I take a bet you won't make it in 5 minutes," and I won the bet, indeed. Yeah. So I made it in 5 minutes, a short summary of the Treaty of Maastricht. Why I say this, and why I say this is, I think this is one of the major problems that we have in the European Union, the question of transparency. And I think this is also a certain factor that played a role with the Brexit. I mean, the British people, I mean, first of all, it's interesting who in Britain, voted for the Brexit. It's mainly the older generation. It's the people in England and Wales, and it's the people more in rural areas. Yeah? And most of the people who live in the cities, many of them didn't go for the referendum, what is certainly a big pity. But these people who voted for Brexit, the main argument for them is take back control. And they had the impression that when you leave something to Brussels, it is something indefinite and it is out of control because you don't understand what is going on there. And I think that is a major target and should be a major objective for the Commission and for all the member countries of the European Union, to work on regulations that are more transparent, because otherwise I fear that the people in Europe will probably not accept this any longer. So we always blame Brussels for regulating the length of banana and so on. So things that maybe do not need to be regulated. At the same time, Brussels also regulates many things of our common life, of our daily life, that are very useful for all of us. But since this is so intransparent, it is extremely difficult for the people to really understand this. And I think also you, as part of the European movement, of people who try to promote the European idea and larger than the existing 2 units that we have, I think it would be a big objective, it would be a meaningful objective to really claim more transparency. The Treaty of Maastricht created more or less the European Union with 3 pillars. It's the European communities that existed, so more or less the economic cooperation, the common foreign and security policy, and the police and judicial cooperation. And when you talk to British, not necessarily to those people who voted for the Brexit, but when you talk to some other people in Britain, what they see mainly critical and where they have doubts whether that should be regulated on European level is the common foreign and security policy, because Britain traditionally feels, in terms of foreign and security policy, not so close to continental Europe, and as we know, also has closer ties to the US than probably the other member countries of the European Union. Then 2002, the introduction of the euro, which I personally believe still is a very big success story and really brought people in Europe much closer together and contributed also to more communication among the people. Certainly, let's say on a detailed level, probably some mistakes were done that we see today. And then as another important step, the Treaty of Lisbon. The Treaty of Lisbon was a major try to strengthen the European Union, because after all the new member countries of the European Union it seemed indeed that the European Union maybe a little bit too hectical and too quickly looked at enlargement with several countries in the East, and maybe forgot to focus a little bit on deepening really the decision-taking process. As you know, so most of, or many of the decisions still need to be taken anonymously and need to be taken with all people voting for it. So what is certainly rather difficult. So therefore I think the Treaty of Lisbon was indeed very much needed, is very, very meaningful, but is only a first step, to my mind, towards really eventually a European Union that takes decisions with majority of the votes. What I personally believe should be the target for most of the decision-taking processes. When we look at the Eurasian integration, and I called it now not only the Eurasian Economic Union, because I think there were several tries with an integration in the Eurasian countries. Yeah? There was already an Eurasian Economic Community in the year 2000 with Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, which probably from today's point of view was a try that did not really work out. I would say probably we can even go back to the CIS approach, which was also a try to bring several countries after the collapse of the Soviet Union again together. Yeah. The single economic space on the basis of the customs union. So this is now, and then with the Eurasian Economic Union as a subject of international law. So what led to this? So this is, I would say, the third try in that region to have a certain economic, potentially in the future also partially political integration. And seems to me this time it probably will be the first approach that might be a long-lasting and sustainable approach. And when I talk to representatives of politics in the West, and I try to discuss a little bit why the European Union finds it so difficult to establish official relationship with the Eurasian Economic Union, I think what you very often hear is, well, there were several tries in that region to create a kind of economic union, but we are still not sure, is this really something sustainable, and will this really work for long term? Because we don't want to have now official relationship with an institution, with a union that we so far... Okay, well, nothing serious happened, so sorry, we just continue.
Continua.
Yeah, so this is one of the factors. So is it really a sustainable approach, this Eurasian Economic Union? And the second point that I very often hear, but I think politicians in the West do not publicly say this, is that there is a fear that the Eurasian Economic Union is too much dominated by Russia and personally by Putin, and that it will be just used as a political instrument. I think it is right to say there is a political idea behind the Eurasian Economic Union, and for this political idea the economic union was created. But that's why I focused also in the very beginning so much on the reasons why the Treaty of Rome and before that the Treaty of Paris was signed, also with very clear political ideas behind that. And therefore what usually then I tell people when they say, well, but it looks more like a political idea and initiated by Mr. Putin, and he has certain specific expectations behind that. The question is certainly, first of all, what are his expectations behind that? And secondly, how do we see how the Eurasian Economic Union develops? Yeah? And when you look at, I'll come to this on the next couple of slides, when you look at the mechanisms, how decisions are taken in the Eurasian Economic Union, we very clearly see that it is very similar to the mechanisms that worked in the European Union prior to the Treaty of Lisbon. And from that point of view, I believe that the Eurasian Economic Union is really a kind of approach where all the 5 member states eventually really can have a very important voting in this institution. And from a Western European perspective, I would say also from a Western European perspective, it is worth to support this initiative, because if it will develop properly further, it can really contribute not only to economic integration, what generally makes sense, but it can also contribute to a peaceful development in that region. And that is at least as important as the economic integration. Yes, please. Yeah, that's a very good question. If I answer it from a Western perspective first, I think in the West indeed this fear that any such integration in Eurasia is too much dominated by Russia. I think that is the biggest fear that probably from a Western point of view you see. When you look from the Eurasian point of view, when I look, for instance, from the point of view of Belarus, I think Belarus finds that very interesting, this integration project, because it makes sure for them that they have the entire Russian market for them, for selling agricultural products, for instance, but also have access to mineral resources and mainly to oil and gas for a much cheaper price. But also from Belarusian point of view, it seems to me that there was always also a certain fear to lose independence. And from Kazakhstani point of view, I think that was very clearly expressed. So President Nazarbayev very clearly said this integration should stop at the economic integration. That is okay, but we don't want political integration. And so considering these statements, I think the main obstacle was probably to define what do we want to integrate. And I think the advice to Russia probably is to make it very clear that yes, there is a political idea behind this, but what we want is an economic integration, and at the moment, not more. And I think if this is very clearly expressed and communicated, and not only communicated, but if this is really what you live in practice within the Eurasian Economic Union, that all the countries, even they are small, they have a certain importance. If you live this principle, I think then it's a more sustainable approach. That is also the experience, to my mind, of the European Union, where you give the smaller countries, at least when you look per capita, more influence than the larger countries. So Luxembourg, for example, is an extremely small member state, really very much influenced the development of the European Union.
I know that you're emphasizing the economic influence that, this being economic union, but clearly the fact that Russia has almost a political power via economics, so with the gas supply and the oil supply, surely, even if we say it's not a political union, in reality, in practice it is. And that's the big fear of the EU, that by supporting the EEU, it's actually just increasing this country's dependency on Russia.
Well, these are facts, certainly, yeah, and that Russia is the strongest economic power within the 5 countries, so this nobody can change. So that's simply a fact you somehow have to live with. But the question is, how do you live with this? Yeah? So do you make use of a certain economic power and use that for political purposes? And the same question we have in the European Union. Yeah? Of course, there is in the European Union not one country that so much economically dominates the entire European Union. But this question is very much to the German Chancellor all the time. Yeah? So on the one hand side, many members of the European Union say the German Chancellor should take more leadership. Yeah? But at the same time, there is also an expectation that Germany does not politically misuse its economic power for political purposes. What principally Germany in the short run could do, in the long run it would not be good, not for Europe, but also not isolated for Germany. And when you look, for instance, today at the position that Germany has with regard to the sanctions against Russia. So the sanctions were somehow, it was said the sanctions will remain as long as Minsk II is not fully implemented. So we all know this will probably, to fully implement Minsk II depends on many countries in that region and probably is not realistic for the next 2-3 years, it seems to me. Many German politicians say yes, we recognize that indeed bringing this together, the question of Minsk II implementation and the question of sanction relief is not reasonable any longer. And maybe it makes sense to choose a step-by-step approach. For instance, the German economic minister also publicly said it might be a good idea. We say progress with Minsk II, certain steps, will lead to a certain release of the sanctions, so step by step. Nevertheless, within the European Council, when this decision had to be taken about prolongation of the sanctions, also Germany voted for the full prolongation. Yeah? And why is that? I mean, it was not officially announced why, but the German Chancellor, she, in many discussions, she very much focuses and underlines the point that that an alignment among all the member countries of the European Union for her is very valuable, and she don't want to risk that. And for that purpose, she's ready to compromise on many matters where she and maybe some other German government representatives might have a different opinion. So what very clearly shows here, you can find this good or not, that's a different story, but it very clearly shows Germany tries, with its power that it has, to nevertheless show many of the member countries of the European Union that a common sense among the member countries of the European Union is more important than certain matters with non-member countries. Yeah? So you can find this good or not good, but that is the approach that the German government has. And I think it's not only an approach of the current Chancellor Merkel, but I think this was very much an approach of all the previous chancellors in Germany as well. That for them, the European integration and a common understanding among the member states of the European Union is a very valuable matter. And so why I say this in so much detail, I'm not suggesting that the Russian government should look at these questions within the Eurasian Economic Union the same way. But I think it is definitely for Russia a good idea when taking decisions in economics to always keep in mind how the other members of the Eurasian Economic Union, how they look at this. So the question, for instance, when Russia decided about the counter-sanctions against the West, principally that is something what within an economic union, principally no country can do. Because the Eurasian Economic Union is also a customs union, has no customs control any longer, and that means principally the flow of goods between Belarus and Russia, but also Russia and Kazakhstan and so on, should be without any barriers. Yeah? So, but now there are barriers with these counter-sanctions from the Russian side. Yeah? So it's a question, is that something what was aligned with the other countries of the Eurasian Economic Union? Russia obviously, it was not aligned, is my understanding. Russia obviously found it more important to show the West we don't accept what you decided, so we take counter-sanctions. Even this is something what speaks at least against the spirit of the Eurasian Economic Union. Again, I'm not saying I want to comment this, I only try to describe it, what such decision-taking processes, what that mean in particular for the question, so what are potential barriers and obstacles for a further integration within a union. Yeah? So always pay attention when you take certain decisions that are related to matters of that union. Look at this also from the perspective of the other member countries. That seems to me is a very important principle to overcome such obstacles and barriers. When you compare the principles of economic freedom in these two unions, they are very similar. Yeah? So you typically have the four freedoms: the free movement of goods, free movement of services, free movement of labor, and free movement of capital. Are all these four movements, all these four freedoms, they are fully realized more or less in the European Union? And in the Eurasian Economic Union, I think it's in process. What would you say, in what area the Eurasian Economic Union probably is most advanced with regard to the four freedoms? Labor is one opinion. Goods, I probably share more that point of view. Why? Why would you say goods?
Because like we have custom union, so we have to during too much time. But as for labor, we have like, for example, with Russia, I'm from Belarus, so with Russia we have it exists. But for example, with Kazakhstan or with Armenia,
it exists what?
It's free movement of labor, for example.
Yeah.
But it's not so much developed, so we don't have the same rules and the same regulation of labor.
Yeah. Okay. Why do you say labor?
For example, I'm from Pakistan. A lot of people, they move to Moscow, for example, and they work here without any comment, without any license. For example,
But they principally need a labor work permit, yeah?
for another country, yeah, for Uzbekistan or Pakistan, yeah, but we are in the one area and we don't need it, for example.
Well, I think the regulations in Russia, if you come from any country of the Eurasian Economic Union, is it really that you don't need a work permit any longer?
Your passport and that's it.
Yeah.
For example, with Belarus, we don't need anything.
With Belarus, there are special agreements. That is by sure. Yeah.
Other member states, it's different.
I know.
And for Kazakhstan, it's also like
For example, in Uzbekistan, they need license.
yeah, from
Yeah.
the custom union.
Kyrgyz and Kazakhstan people, they don't do it.
Okay. Well, last year I still remember, so if you were from Kazakhstan or Kyrgyzstan, then you still needed not a work permit, but a special license that very easily could be issued. So maybe now from this year, not any longer. With Belarus, indeed, it was already for several years that nothing is required. So that would mean, indeed, then there is good progress on free movement of labor, indeed. And free movement of goods is for a longer time even realized. Yeah, free movement of services, what does that mean, by the way? Any good examples?
Like financial services or in tourism.
Yeah, so that would mean that, for example, an insurance company in Almaty can offer insurance coverage in Belarus. What is not the case so far, I believe, is one point. So I think that is in process. And the second point is you have actually, for the service area, quite some tax barriers still in place. If you are, let's assume, a Belarusian entrepreneur and you conclude a service agreement with any provider in Kazakhstan or Kyrgyzstan, then this service provider in Kyrgyzstan has to add Kyrgyzstani VAT. What percentage?
12 or 13.
Yeah, so in Kazakhstan it's 12. In Kyrgyzstan is the same? Okay, so let's assume 12%. So that means you send an invoice from Kyrgyzstan to Belarus and you add 12% of Kyrgyzstani VAT, which in Belarus you cannot deduct. But if you have a Belarusian service provider and this Belarusian service provider sends you an invoice with Belarusian VAT, what is 20%, so even more, then the Belarusian entrepreneur can deduct this VAT, the 20%. So this is neutral for him. Yeah? So if it is within one country, then VAT doesn't matter. If it is between the countries, then VAT still matters, which is different in the European Union. In the European Union, there is an agreement that the VAT system is harmonized, and when you provide a service from France to Germany, for example, or from Italy to the UK, then either no VAT at all, or you can claim back the VAT of the other country. So what is makes sure that indeed there is a freedom of services. This is indeed a very important point in the service area, and is a point that with my company Schneider Group, and actually together with the German-Russian Chamber of Commerce, we once presented both to the Russian tax authorities, to the Ministry of Finance in Moscow, but also to the responsible minister in the Commission of the Eurasian Economic Union, and made them aware of this. So what happened? Then there was a hearing on this. This is actually a very interesting example what should not happen within a union. So then there was a hearing, and one of my colleagues presented the case in front of 10 people, 2 representatives from each country, tax experts. And we described this problem. And we also mentioned that Belarus indeed changed its tax legislation with regard to these cross-country, inter-country services. And so we explained that within an economic union it makes sense to change these VAT rules. And then all the 5 countries should comment on that. So that was the rule, official hearing. Yeah? Belarus first of all explained why they already changed legislation and why this is good. Kazakhstan was very cautious to express its opinion. Kyrgyzstan and Armenia, was my impression, did not fully understand yet what it was about, because for them they are rather new in the economic union, so it's understandable. Yeah? And then Russia had to make its point, and the Russian representative just said, well, we have problems with our state budget, and so we don't agree to this because it may lead to less tax revenue, and whether maybe it promotes the trade of services and generally will support economy and thus will create more tax revenue is maybe in the far future, and you from Belarus, with your changes, we discussed it under four eyes separately. So this was the message. I'm very sorry, I have to say, so this is not a good behavior within a union. Yeah? So it was more like you blamed one member country to being more progressive in tax legislation. So that was not really good, and is I think an example that sets up more new barriers than contributing to integration. Yeah? Free movement of capital, maybe we shortly cover that point. How is that in the Eurasian Economic Union, with free movement of capital? Let's take the most prominent barrier in daily life for free movement of capital, so currency control, valutny control, that the bank has to do when you do international payments. Is there valutny control, currency control, when you do a payment from Kyrgyzstan to Russia? Yeah, there are limits. I don't know, in Kyrgyzstan, in Russia it is $50,000. If you have a transaction of up to $50,000, then there is no special requirement for providing a lot of documentation. If it is higher, then you have to provide a lot of documentation. And that is also for deals between Russian and Kazakhstani or Belarusian or Kyrgyzstani or Armenian companies. So at least in Russia, this free movement of capital is not yet realized. I think in Belarus it's the same. When you transfer money from Belarus to Kyrgyzstan, there are quite some obstacles, and it's not that easy as within Belarus.
There's too much bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Like with Russia it works, but with other countries no.
Within the European Union, it is more or less realized, the free movement of capital, but some of the aspects were only introduced recently. So, for example, a common system of bank account numbers. So now it is rather easy to make a bank transfer from Paris to London, or from Paris to Vienna, because the system of bank account numbers was unified. So that is really, in the European Union, it is more or less fully implemented. There are some other similarities. The similarities on macroeconomic factors that the countries should meet in order to have a more or less harmonized or the same direction directed economic development. And the regulation is in both the Eurasian Economic Union as well as the, there's one E too much, either this or this, take away please. The regulation is that every year, so usually countries make new public debt every year. So they take more loans, credits, and so on. And it should not exceed more than 3% of the annual GDP, of the gross domestic product. So this is a regulation both in the European Union as well as in the Eurasian Economic Union, and counts for all the member states. Do the member states meet this requirement? No? Not any single country?
But in Eurasian Economic Union, I guess Armenia, I don't remember exactly, but sometimes it meets, for example, Belarus doesn't meet it.
Yeah, Belarus, I think last year had a major problem. We hope that was an exception. Generally, in the midterm, when you look at the statistics, the countries of the Eurasian Economic Union, they meet this criteria. Belarus was an exception for 1 or 2 years.
But I guess the main problem we have also inflation, so it doesn't makes 20%, but the value is much more. I guess in some countries it is.
Yeah, and actually I didn't write down this argument with inflation, but yeah, first it was public deficit, so Belarus had a temporary problem. The other countries of the Eurasian Economic Union meet this criteria. In the European Union, many countries violate this. unfortunately. Debt to GDP ratio, so the total public debt that you have in total that was accumulated over years, decades, or centuries, well, not that many years yet, should not exceed in the European Union 60%. So this is something what in the Treaty of Maastricht was decided upon. And in the Eurasian Economic Union should not be more than 50%. Actually, the member states of the Eurasian Economic Union meet the 50% criteria. Most countries of the European Union do not meet the 60% criteria. Even Germany, as a country that is famous for counting every euro twice before spending it, and insisting very much on the reasonable budget planning. Even Germany, I think, is at the moment with 80 or 90% of public debt, much above the limit that was set with the 60%. And by the way, maybe I quickly want to get back with this point. So when we talk about what are obstacles for further integration, this is actually a point where the German people are very sensitive when it comes to the question of public debt and inflation. Germany traditionally is in the European Union the country that very much insists on financial stability. Most of the other countries of the European Union don't find this so good. I mean, you have some other countries who support this, for example, the Scandinavian countries, but for instance, France, also Spain and Italy, they usually prefer a different financial policy than Germany. The financial policy is not yet harmonized in the European Union, and this question of financial stability is a permanent matter of dispute among the member countries of the European Union. And you have a very interesting effect here. On the one hand side, you say financial policy is not fully harmonized in the European Union countries. At the same time, you have the euro as a single currency, which certainly, and the central bank, the European Central Bank, certainly has a lot of influence on the question of financial stability or not stability. Yeah? So here you have a kind of very difficult situation. On the one hand side with the European Central Bank, someone huge influence on this question of financial stability, but at the same time, so on European level, but at the same time, financial matters and tax matters are still matters of the single countries. So this is a conflict in itself, first of all. And then secondly, you have very different opinion on the question of to what extent you should insist every year on financial stability, or should you have a more loose budget spending in order to potentially promote the economy. And why I say this is, so the German finance minister, Mr. Schäuble, I think he's as well known as Chancellor Merkel, and many people hate him, in particular outside Germany. So this is a very difficult matter for Germany, how to deal with this. On the one hand side, the German government sees that the people in Germany very much care about this financial stability, and you can't win any vote in Germany, you can't win any election in Germany if you don't insist on financial stability. At the same time, you can't win any friends in the European Union as a German if you insist too much on this financial stability. Yeah? So that is something where you have to find the borderline. Yeah? And this is very, very difficult for each and every German citizen and for each and every German chancellor and finance minister. But it's a question eventually of also further integration of barriers for integration.
Yeah, I want to ask you for your personal opinion exactly concerning this clash between the harmonized monetary rules in the EU and
The harmonized what?
monetary rules and the fact that fiscal rules still remain mostly national, and this lag is also seen as a potential reason for the economic crisis in the EU. So would you support the idea of further integration, like besides if that this is really possible at the moment, but would you think that would be a step you should take, or what do you think?
Yeah, I personally, to make the answer short first and then the longer version, I'm a friend still of the United States of Europe, what means also to have a harmonized fiscal policy. And to have a European government that also makes sure that the member countries meet all the criteria that are set up in the Treaty of Maastricht. So I believe eventually the European Union should become the United States of Europe. That is not in 5 years, certainly. This kind of gap between the monetary policy by the central bank, so on the European level, and with an institution that is not directly elected by the people, and at the same time the fiscal policy in national hands, yes, is a conflict. Principally should not be so much a conflict if all the member countries meet these criteria. Yeah? So the conflict is mainly about the question, shall we stick to the rules that we set up by ourselves? And I think we should.
But how can you make that sure? For example, Germany and France already violated the stability and growth pact, like in the very beginning. So how could you achieve this, making sure that member states really have to?
Well, you give me the best reason for what I said. The long-term vision should be the United States of Europe, because it never will work because of exactly what you just mentioned. Yeah? Even larger countries, or the largest countries like France and Germany, they violate their own rules. Yeah? And there is no one who finally tells them, you Chancellor, President, you go to prison if you don't follow these rules. Yeah? So they set up rules and they can change them whenever they want. So that's reality. Yeah? And there's only one way, it seems to me, to change this, indeed, to strengthen the European institutions. And when I say the European institutions, I don't mean the Commission of the European Union, because the Commission of the European Union is at the moment actually, seems to me, has too much power than too little power, and is not properly elected. So more power still for the European Parliament. So that is most important when we go ahead with European integration. And the Parliament eventually should be the institution that then elects the government of the European Union, and the government is an institution instead of the Commission of the Commission that is led by Mr. Juncker. Maybe Mr. Juncker could become the Prime Minister of the European government. I find him quite good, I should say so, but that is my personal vision how it should develop. But that is not realistic for the next 5 years, but I think it's that is the path Europe should go if we really want eventually to avoid exactly such conflicts like you just mentioned. So the largest member countries, they first support rules and then later they violate these rules. I think there was one other question. Okay. Now looking a little bit at the differences. The Eurasian Economic Union very clearly says it's an economic union, no political integration, no common foreign policy, no common jurisdiction, no common currency. What would you suppose if they ever go beyond what they do at the moment, that they go for any of these 4 bullet points? What is most realistic they could agree on?
Probably currency, but you can use.
I think common foreign policy.
Okay, so maybe make a short vote. So who believes for the foreign policy? 1, 2, 3. Who believes for the common currency? So it's about 10, 12, 13. Okay, and the political integration is very vague and not so clear what is meant. And the common jurisdiction. 1, 2, 3. But I find this good, actually, because what does it mean, common jurisdiction? I think a common jurisdiction is something within an economic union what principally you need, at least on the level of what in Russian is called arbitrajный суд. Yeah, so eventually I think what you need is indeed, when you want to have free movements of services, people and goods and capital, you need certain common rules and how all this is organized and also how it is controlled eventually. Yeah? And so therefore the idea of a common jurisdiction I don't find so unrealistic for the Eurasian Economic Union. So I would probably say common jurisdiction and the common currency, that is most likely what might be the next steps. And so now I would like to, we have half an hour, 25 minutes left, I would like to shortly comment on the single economic space from Vladivostok to Lisbon. So which certainly should not be only a project of the two unions, of the Eurasian Economic Union and the European Union, but that should be a project of including all the countries in between. Yeah? And so in between you have at least Azerbaijan, Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova and Serbia. And so you have actually quite some statements by both the Russian president as well as German government representatives. I think mainly it comes from these two countries, such statements, but actually also the president of the EU Commission, Mr. Juncker, now recently expressed this from time to time, this idea. And is that something what is a long-term vision, or is that something what is a concrete plan that can be implemented? So that I think is a very important question, yeah? An idea that could solve the political conflict in Eurasia and bring the nations closer together. That is an interesting sentence, and so far, anybody of you knows when this idea of a common economic space, a single economic space, Vladivostok, Lisbon, when this was first time expressed? Is that something rather new? Is that something?
I just know that
Yeah, so early 2000 it was that Putin, for example, mentioned that.
But I would like to mention that in the beginning of 20th century, Mikhail Kalergi talked about pan-European space. It meant that there was one space from Vladivostok to Lisbon.
Yeah, so it was, that is a good point, good that you bring that up, because sometimes probably a similar idea was just differently expressed. And who else maybe we can mention as someone who had this vision or idea? Pardon? Charles de Gaulle, well, he was talking about Europe of the nations. I'm not so sure had he in mind already. Maybe, yeah. I'm actually not so sure what he meant. Peter the Great? Okay. Well, I have to still, maybe read some more literature on that, who expressed what when. Do you have any specific statement of Peter the Great in mind? Yeah, I mean, certainly Peter the Great was the person who wanted to integrate Russia into the Western European economics. Yeah.
Sorry. This idea was mentioned first Queen Lecturer,
Okay, could be that they discussed that. Yeah.
I'm deeply researching this field, so I'm studying European integration and this Russia is part of Europe or apart. So it's not
When we maybe don't go that far back, I would say also what Gorbachev, for example, expressed, like the idea of a common European house, I think was his. And Mitterrand mentioned that as well, yeah. So I think the idea that they had in mind was probably similar. I believe when Mitterrand and when Gorbachev talked a common European house, they probably have more in mind than an economic space. I think when Russians, for example, today speak about this idea, they also usually talk about a common economic and humanitarian area from Vladivostok to Lisbon. This is more or less, I think, the wording that Putin usually uses. Yeah, but we see it grows really quite some time. It goes quite back in history. This idea, so several decades, and but it became. But it was mentioned so often, in particular, the last 2 years. And it was mentioned very often somehow connected to the conflict on Ukraine. Yeah? Why? And this is so interesting, I believe, because it shows again that political thoughts lead to economic ideas. Yeah? So like the creation of the Eurasian Economic Union, like the creation of the European Union, here again we have a good example that economic cooperation, integration, the proposal is based on certain political thinking during a very difficult political times. Yeah? In the very beginning, people stated that there is an idea of a free trade zone from Vladivostok to Lisbon. This is not realistic at all at the moment. I will come back to that on the following slides. But a single economic space certainly is much more than a free trade zone. We will soon talk about technical standards that work from Vladivostok to Lisbon. So technical standards that can resist stronger wind. And a couple of these ideas, what is such a common single economic space from Vladivostok to Lisbon, could mean certification technical standards, yeah, so that something like this will not happen. But that we are protected. Simplifying of customs processes. So as I said, getting rid of all the customs tariffs is not realistic at the moment, but to simplify the procedure so that someone who wants to deliver from Moscow to Paris and has to import into the European Union can easily understand the procedure, because the procedure from Moscow to Paris could be harmonized with the procedure how to deliver from Paris to Moscow. Yeah? You still have to pay customs tariffs, but if the bureaucracy is reduced and the forms are, for example, the same, everything would be much easier. Tax harmonization mainly refers to this question what we already had with the VAT rules, yeah? Because this problem that we have between Kyrgyzstan and Belarus with the VAT is exactly the same that we have between the countries of the European Union on the one hand side and the countries of the Eurasian Economic Union on the other side. Harmonized jurisdiction. Very often when you have machinery delivery from Marseille to Novosibirsk, yeah, you work out a contract and then you have to think, well, is it better to apply Russian law? Is it better to apply French law? From the French perspective, what is better? The French manufacturer delivers to Novosibirsk, and in the contract, the sale purchase agreement, should he agree on French or Russian legislation? And why French? And eventually, certainly the question is important in what court takes a decision in case of a dispute. So that would mean that then probably a French court should rule this contract. Will this help? Yeah, so here we have the question, the French manufacturer probably don't want that eventually a Russian court may rule this contract because he fears that there is corruption and so on. At the same time, if he says, well, we have French legislation and the French court rules the contract, then maybe this French court takes a decision. And do we believe that the police in the law enforcement authorities in Novosibirsk will go to that client and will say, here the court in Marseille decided and now paid to the French manufacturer? Probably will not happen. Yeah? And so therefore, in order to have really a system that is working, it would be good if we have a harmonized jurisdiction, maybe with courts that specifically for these purposes are set up. No court decisions on, only court decisions on economic matters. Yeah? And if we have a centralized system a centralized court system just for the trade relationship between all the countries, that probably will work very much. Yeah? Common research and science. I found this yesterday very interesting what the ex-minister and astronaut told us. The research and science area is usually an area where cooperation works best, yeah, because it is totally non-political. Common energy infrastructure, I think, makes a lot of sense, simply because in the East a lot of resources and in the West a lot of need. Yeah. And visa-free freedom or visa at entry, or the Kazakhstani approach, I think is something we should try to work on for even the near future. Yeah. Ideally, I find it a good idea to have no visa regime between Vladivostok, from Vladivostok to Lisbon, or at least for the beginning to agree, for example, that a 3 or 5 day business trip or also leisure trip does not require any visa. When you enter Kazakhstan, Kazakhstan has a visa-free regime for 15 countries for people who do not enter Kazakhstan longer than 10 days. So when I travel to Kazakhstan, and I only travel there usually for 2 days or so, I don't need a visa any longer because Germany falls under these countries with visa-free regime in Kazakhstan. And such approach, I think, would help very much, because many people are just afraid of going to the other country because it's such a bureaucracy with all the visa questions. We just said in the East you have all the resources, in the West you have interesting technology, and technology transfer is one of the objectives within such a single economic space. And when you, in the Russian-speaking countries, you have not only the resources, but for example, take the IT sector. How many, so many interesting IT experts you have in Ukraine, in Belarus, in Russia, and I think the idea of many Western companies do IT outsourcing with India. I think it can be a very good addition or alternative to also think about such IT outsourcing with the Russian-speaking countries. It would bring the countries closer together. The flight from Paris to Moscow is not that far, or to Belarus or to Ukraine, it's not that far then to India. The working mentality is much closer for Western companies than the working mentality in India. So there are lots of reasons why such cooperation in IT, for example, would be to the benefit. I will skip actually some of the slides because we're running out a little bit of time. And this bullet point in the middle here I find quite important. Everybody knows about the fourth industrial revolution, yeah? Industry 4.0. What is Industry 4.0? Was das hier? Internet of Things, it's called in America actually, yeah. And what does it mean? Yeah, so like the smart factory, yeah, that not only people communicate with each other, but things communicate with each other. Yeah? So, for example, in the factory where they manufacture cars, the last wheel that is on store will give a message to the manufacturer in a different country, and just will tell the manufacturer, so we are getting out of tires, we need more wheels to deliver, yeah? And then everything works automatically, this entire process. So the digitalization of the entire manufacturing process, yeah, is a very important aspect here. So when you think about this Industry 4.0 project, I think here you have huge cooperation possibilities between the West and the East. So you have so great engineers in many of the countries of the European Union who know how to practically apply their new knowledge. You have actually also great engineers in the Russian-speaking countries. Sometimes my impression is they are excellent, but unfortunately the link to the manufacturing process does not properly work. But at the same time, they have all these great IT experts. Yeah? And when you bring all these people together, I'm 100% sure the Industry 4.0 project would work perfectly. So here are a couple of quotations of people who speak in favor of the common economic space, and also some longer sentences. We don't need to go through all of that now. Want to, here you quickly see what is the problem actually for some of the countries to agree to free trade. When you look just at the import customs rates, then what I briefly mentioned yesterday, so in the European Union they are very low, the import duties. In the countries of the Eurasian Economic Union they are 3-4 times that high, and therefore for the countries of the Eurasian Economic Union it's so difficult to agree on free trade right away. But as I said, I think this is not the most important aspect of a single economic space. And at the end, I want to briefly tell you about a couple of initiatives. So I very much want to promote this idea of a single economic space, and what I did is I created a small working group in Berlin of a couple of managers. And I said, let's sit together and we develop a kind of concept how we can promote this idea of a single economic space from Vladivostok to Lisbon. In the very beginning, and I also talked to business associations, and they were a little bit skeptical, but said, okay, well, Mr. Schneider, if you invite for a meeting and you pay us the lunch, probably we will come. Yeah. So I invited actually, and to make it a little bit more attractive, I invited also one politician from whom I know that he supports this idea. So he was like the keynote speaker, and I organized this in a hotel on a small island in the suburbs of Berlin. The people could not escape from that island, so they had to stick together. And we spent actually almost one full day with a small discussion on this project. And at the end, one person said, well, maybe we should formalize this workshop a little bit more. You have a question?
Sorry, I let you finish first.
Pardon?
I can ask a question after.
Okay, I finish my sentences and then we get back. So at the end, several people said, well, let's formalize this workshop. And they said, okay, so here are individuals who also present certain business associations. So now in the meantime, we had recently, I think months ago, we had another meeting of this working group, and then already 4 German business associations agreed to officially be members. And we worked out a position paper, yeah, and it was agreed now among all the 4 business associations, and they all agreed to sign it. So now we have already a very solid base. The next step, what I did is I said, okay, but that is good that 4 German business associations support this. So, but now we need support from everywhere between Vladivostok and Lisbon. Yeah? So I started with those countries where I have offices of Schneider Group and where I anyway regularly travel to. And so it was 2 weeks ago. I visited no, actually last week it was, yeah, last week I talked to the National Chamber of Belarus, I talked to the National Chamber of Commerce of Ukraine, and I talked to the National Chamber of Commerce of Poland. And I presented them this position paper, and I said, well, we very much want your support for this. Yeah? So now they internally discuss that, and eventually what I want to achieve is that I have many countries from Vladivostok to Lisbon where the chambers of commerces, where the business people, where they support this. Yeah? And I think business people, they can not so easily, but it's easier with business people to agree on a concept for this common economic space from Vladivostok to Lisbon than right away talking to politicians. And once we have then many countries unified for this position paper, then we will present it to politics. Why I choose this approach was actually I had a chance about a month ago to briefly talk to the German foreign minister, Mr. Steinmeier, after he gave a presentation in Berlin, and he spent 3 minutes for this small discussion with me, and I presented him this idea. And he just told me, okay, I support this idea, and I need a position paper that we also, politicians, we will support, but the best strategy would be you align this among the business community in many of the countries, and then for us as politicians, it will be easier to also agree to that. You know? And so this strategy we have chosen, and so now we are actually quite advanced. Some pictures of this working group. Very soon we will present this to politics. Maybe 3 theses for the end. There are contradicting views on Russia inside the EU. It's actually not so much now a conclusion of this presentation, more actually like some new points, but it relates a little bit to what I said before. So this conflict between Russia and the West is not so much only a conflict between Russia and the West. It is actually, you have in the West many, many different points of view on this conflict. But as I said earlier, for example, the German government, it is a very high valuable good to show that within the European Union you have a common understanding. But inside the European Union, many different views. In situations where politics has come to a dead end, economy bears a very special responsibility. That is a very important sentence for me. We are at the moment in a situation where politics got stuck a little bit in dead end. This question with Minsk II and the sanctions very much shows that. So economics and business have a very special responsibility to help somehow bridging in such politically difficult situation. And I think this project, Vladivostok Lisbon, is a project where business can take the leadership and can show this responsibility that I mean. Yeah? In a pluralistic society, each voice counts. What I mean with that is take initiative, and I know you do this, but this project, and that's why I also showed you a little bit at the end, I started this initiative a little bit more than half a year ago with this position paper on the single economic space, Vladivostok Lisbon. So, and now I have 4 business associations in Germany that I found that support and signed this paper. Now I hope I soon have Belarus, Ukraine, and Poland, the national chambers. In Moscow I also very soon will have the talks and so on. So, and it started only this initiative half a year ago, and it's quite advanced, and it shows indeed each single person can reach a lot if you take initiative and if you sustainably work on your objective. Yeah? And this is why I also find this so good, your initiatives, because you are the front runners to bring really the people from the Pacific to the Atlantic together. And therefore everything what you do is very much required, in particular during these politically very difficult times. I think I spoke much longer than I was supposed to. Thank you very much for your attention. A couple of minutes are still left for questions. So you had a question.
Yeah. Well, now concluding, I understood that your strategy will focus on the business community first and then continue politically. But as you said before, political thoughts also lead to economic ideas. So how to overcome obstacles for this idea, like, for example, very recent, the rise of radical right parties and also nationalism in Europe, because those are big obstacles for such an idea and such a vision.
Yes, certainly these are obstacles. I think the answer is very difficult, so I can't say that I have an answer right away, but I definitely can say it is no answer to say, well, we go back to all the national countries. That is a step back, and I don't think that looking back at the last century, when we had very strong national countries in Europe, that this was the best for peace. So a step back is definitely no answer. A step forward is the answer, definitely, but the question is, yeah, how this step forward should look like. So I mentioned earlier this question of transparency in the European Union. I think this is an extremely important point, because also, I mean, in Germany I also see that we have many right-winged people who go on the streets, who don't believe any longer in the future, in their own future, and fear that because of all the refugees, and not only the refugees, that their future looks not good. Yeah? Partially, I can fully understand their fears, and I'm not sure if I were in their situation. These are usually hopeless people in very hopeless situations. Yeah? I don't know how I had reacted. Yeah, difficult to predict that. But so it's a question of transparency, I think, to show what a unification and what, when people come together, what can be achieved. And secondly, it's a question of solidarity also with those people who feel at the moment in Europe and who are open for the right radicals. These are usually people who have no hope in their life. Yeah? And we have to take that seriously. Just to abandon them and say, stupid what you say, is also no strategy. Yeah? One has to sit together with these people. Individual talks takes a lot of time, lots of effort that are required. Also open to listen to them and yeah, work out strategies also for them how to find a way out of their certain also desperate situations. It's not really a very concrete answer, but I don't have a concrete answer.
Yeah, but I agree. I think it's also a question of fighting, or like politicians to fight the political alienation, so that people, yeah, trust again, trust politics in general, so that they will also be able to make this step forward instead of a step back. Yeah.
I mean, you have a very clear example with what you see in the US at the moment. It is the candidate Trump. Yeah? He makes use of exactly this this feeling of the people, that hopeless situation, and nothing is transparent for them. Yeah, I mean, so now yesterday we learned that Ms. Clinton was maybe supported more than the other candidate, Mr. Sanders. And that the elite of the Democratic Party took too early support for Ms. Clinton, and well, that is again this point regarding transparency, and Trump makes use of that.
Another note on contradicting views on Russia inside the EU. I mean, obviously the main thing is political, but I also find an interesting cultural contradicting views. You know, I'm from Bulgaria, perhaps that's why I have this view, but what my impression in Western Europe is that a lot of people see Russia as a completely different culture. And I'm thinking about organizing an event. I'll talk to the others who go to Europe. about how actually all the countries on the European continent come from the same cradle, from the same civilizations, from ancient Greece and ancient Rome. And actually the underlying culture is very similar from Lisbon to Vladivostok. And you know, Moscow is famously the third Rome, which took Christianity once Europe was invaded by the Ottoman Empire. So for me, it's very clear to see that the underlying culture and values in the whole of the European continent are very similar. And this is something which is never mentioned, but I think which is quite important, that all of our cultures ultimately come from the ancient Greeks and Romans, and also from Christianity. Even if we're atheists today, it still has influence in the legal system and in the values. So I wonder what you think about this. And in this respect, do you see the single economic space similar to the EU and the Eurasian Economic Union, not just as an economic project, but in the very long term,
Well, it has a political vision. Whether it becomes eventually a political union or not, that is maybe a project for the next century. Yeah? But to work now on this economic integration from Vladivostok to Lisbon has a political idea behind that. Although it should not, at this stage, I think, become any project with political integration aspects. But it should definitely have the aspect of, and therefore I find this Russian wording of this single economic space from Vladivostok to Lisbon not only on economic but humanitarian aspects. I find this generally quite good. Whether I should say humanitarian is maybe also not the right translation from the Russian word, humanitarny, but to say it's not only bringing business people together, but it is generally to bring all the people together from Vladivostok to Lisbon. So that definitely should be one of the objectives of such initiative. Yeah, it's very interesting actually what you say, because it just reminds me to an interview that I had with someone who just started in my Moscow office, a director who's from Bulgaria, who worked in Germany and now moved to Russia, and had a very similar discussion actually with him recently. Yeah. Good. Very sorry, I have to leave now to the airport. It was an extremely interesting discussion with you. Thank you very much for all your questions, and wish you a good remaining week with your summer school, and hope the weather will stay like this so that you can continue this format. That's really a great format. Very much appreciated. So have a good week, have a good day.